Today, we are ranking NFL logo designs from S tier to D tier in celebration of the upcoming Super Bowl. I have been dreading doing sports logos because I know how attached people are to their teams. With that being said, let's get started. Starting off with the Cardinals logo, a mascot that has some realistic elements and cartoonish elements. This works fairly well, and I think the colors pop out too. I feel pretty comfortable starting us off putting Arizona in A tier. It doesn't feel like just a straight up illustration of a cardinal. It has some design thinking put into it. How the shapes are going to flow together, how you're going to create expressive characteristics and make the mascot feel like it's alive. Those are going to be the main things we're looking for in mascot logos. That's why I feel like the Cardinals logo does that pretty well. Up next, I believe this is the Falcons logo. So this is fairly different from the Cardinals logo that we just looked at, but some of the things that I like about this that is similar is that it takes a shape and it uses it consistently throughout the design language. So it has this kind of slanted rectangular shape that gets used in the shape of the falcon, these little highlights inside of the wings and the body. I think the Falcons logo is very memorable. Someone in the chat pointed out that it also looks like an F, which if you didn't catch that could be a really nice touch. So maybe I would put it in between S and A tier. So maybe we'll say S tier, but I would put it in between. So we're going into another mascot, the Ravens logo, and I don't know if I'm the only one, but this logo creeps me out a little bit. The sharp feathers and the jagged angles, especially towards the center, feel super aggressive. I will say though, from a distance, the red and the purple, because they're against this black background, they get a little hard to see and they blend in together a bit too much. I'm going to say for this logo, I would probably put the Ravens in B tier. When I compare the Cardinals and the Ravens logo, the Cardinals logo feels a bit more clear, and I think it has a little more expressiveness in it. So looking at the Bills logo, this is another mascot that I'm a big fan of with like this silhouette, and these colors especially stand out. There's a lot of contrast. Even though this is a static logo, you can see that it's jumping, and then this light streak is clearly looking as if it's propelling itself forward, which I think also relates really well to the NFL and football in general. I do think the silhouette maybe gets a little bit lost at a smaller scale, so I'll put it in A tier as well. So moving into the Panthers logo, I think this is pulled directly from the NFL website, but the Panthers logo doesn't have any type of backing to make it more legible on a dark background. A lot of these logos you can see have like this double outline where it makes it possible for them to work against a dark background and a light background. But when you are close enough to the logo, I think the mascot is very expressive. Curved lines of the teeth, the whiskers, they all kind of match in a way that is very balanced and appealing. If we put it against a bright background, it works very well. I still feel pretty comfortable putting the Panthers logo in A tier. So looking at the Bears logo, I think that there's really not a whole lot to say about it. It is fairly balanced and it works, it does its job. I do like that they added this serif at the end of the C here, this kind of cut. So that's a nice little detail that makes it feel a little bit more designed than just being a letter C, but I think for the most part, I would say probably C tier. So looking at the Bengals logo, we just looked at the Bears logo, which I put in C tier because it's fairly straightforward. It's just the letter C. Despite the fact that we put the Bears logo in C tier, I think the Bengals logo is actually pretty appealing to look at. And I think the shapes are very balanced. So I like the proportions in these cuts and everything feels very bold. I would put it either in B or A tier. To make a decision, I would probably put it in A tier. It actually incorporates some design elements that I could see being very useful for the brand in its design system. So there's a lot of opportunity with a logo like this. So up next with the Browns logo, I think this is probably the most straightforward example of just a literal logo. I don't think anyone would argue this, but when we're looking at just the design, I think it's pretty clear the Browns logo is a D tier logo because it's just too straightforward. Any of the teams in the NFL could make this their logo. And that's the main thing, is if your logo can be replicated into your competitors' brands, it's not going to stand out. Imagine if the Nike logo was just an illustration of a shoe. Looking at the Cowboys logo, I think it's another very straightforward one. The star has significance for the location. Because that star is so relevant, I think it works to some extent. There really isn't a whole lot to say about it. I'm gonna say it's a C tier logo. It's definitely not the worst logo, but I think it's just so straightforward. It would be hard to argue just from the design alone that it would be an A or B tier logo. I think Cowboys fans will appreciate the star the most. We're just looking at the visual perspective of it, right? It's recognizable because of the team, not because of the design. Looking at another mascot logo, we have the Broncos. When you look at it from a distance, I think it's still very clear. And I think the proportions of these strokes and the proportions of the color are all very thoughtful. The Broncos logo is just appealing to look at. It has that aggressive personality to it, so it has characteristics that make it feel alive. And because it feels alive, I would probably put it with a lot of these other mascots in A tier. The colors are awesome. I love the complementary navy and orange. Looking at the Lions logo, we have another mascot silhouette that I think works very well. It feels very expressive. Having that action pose makes it feel more alive. It gives that personality that we're looking for. But because the pose is so iconic, the way that it's like pouncing up, even when you zoom out, the shapes of it are still fairly easy to read. The Lions logo, I would probably put either in B or A tier. Maybe we put it in B tier just because of the color. Feels a little more flat than the rest of the logos in the A tier category, and it makes it feel a little bit more bland. This is going to be tough because my dad is from Green Bay. The logo, especially compared to the Bears, they're almost identical, so it's just a letter mark with a little bit of personality. It's got some nice colors. I really like the green and the yellow. I think it just makes sense to put wherever the Bears logo is, it makes sense to put the Packers logo. If you feel like the Bears logo is B tier, you would probably also put the Packers logo in B tier. I have to make sure my dad doesn't see this. So looking at the Texans logo, the fact that it's kind of bending forward makes it feel like it's sprinting, even though it doesn't have a body to portray that like the Bills logo. If we were to compare the Cowboys logo versus the Texans logo from a design standpoint, I think using the star for the eye feels more thoughtful. There's really nothing I would change about this logo. I think it's perfectly simplified, but still has that aggression, the character. The Texans logo, I would probably put as my first S tier, strong S tier design. It's maybe my favorite logo in the NFL. Someone in the chat also pointed out that it looks very similar to the shape of Texas, which I think is a really nice touch if that was intentional. Looking at the Colts logo, another one that I think is very straightforward. The horseshoe, I guess, makes sense. I just don't think it has that same personality that a lot of the other logos have. And if I were to look at the logos we've ranked so far, I think it would make sense to me, just from a design standpoint, to put the Colts logo in C tier. So looking at the Jaguars logo, this one is very interesting to me because initially I would think with these spots, this is way too much detail and it could be simplified. But what I noticed is when I zoom out, the spots are distanced just far enough apart to where when you get to this small scale, you can still see each individual dot and they don't blend together. I do think the color used in the eye, the tongue, and the nose is a little bit dark, and it maybe gets lost when you zoom out. But I think for the most part, it works very well. So it feels aggressive. So it's a little bit busy, but I think they found a way to make it work just well enough. I would probably put it in B tier. So looking at the Kansas City Chiefs logo, so I don't think the shape of the arrowhead matches the typography at all. I think these wiggling kind of smooth lines and then these sharp blocky letters don't really have a relationship together, and it definitely feels outdated. The typography feels kind of like word art. So I'm gonna put it in D tier. So this logo, I'm a little bit scared to review because I know it's so controversial, but looking at the LA Rams logo, I'm personally a fan. I know that opinions can be pretty polarized depending on how you view logo design, but I think the LA Rams logo was a very smart decision because they created this logo specifically when they moved to LA, and I like that they used LA to emphasize the fact that they had moved locations. So morphing typography into the shape of a mascot is something that's not easy, but from a design perspective, I'm a big fan of it. I would probably put it in S tier. I would say this logo is either S tier or D tier and not anything in between. It just kind of depends on what types of logos you like. I like that they're doing something different. So looking at the Chargers logo, I think this is another very straightforward design, but I do think there are some characteristics that give this more personality than if they were just to do like a generic lightning icon. So I do like the Chargers logo. I don't know if it's going to be the most memorable in the league. It feeling like it's almost jumping helps it stand out a little bit and not feel like a direct translation of their name. I would either put it in high C or B tier. I would argue that maybe it should go in B tier. So looking at the Raiders logo, I think there's some opportunity for this logo that's maybe not getting utilized to its fullest potential. I think the main thing being that the character looks so neutral and it doesn't have any emotion to it. If anyone uses Adobe Illustrator, it kind of looks like if you were to just auto trace a photo of someone's face. I think the typography works, but is maybe hard to read at smaller scales when you zoom out. And the shape of the badge feels kind of generic, so there's a lot of badge logos out there. I will say I do like that they added the football helmet to tie the two together, like our football players are supposed to be these people. I'm really torn between C or D tier, so I'll just leave it in between. So looking at the Dolphins logo, I think there are some good and some bad things going on. I do really like the orange and the blue complementary colors. It definitely stands out and it feels very high energy with these bright colors. The shape of the sun I don't think really matches the dolphin, which feels very smooth. There's so many points in the sun. One thing I'll say about the mascot as well is the dolphin feels very plain. I don't know about any of you, but this is how I used to draw a sun when I was a kid, where you would do the spiky lines on the outside. So with that being said, there's one quirk to it that I think works well, but there's a lot of things that would need to get fixed. So I would put it in C tier. Looking at the Vikings logo, I'm a fan of the overall design. The line work is very smooth. Even though it's making a blank expression, I like that they had the chin jetting out and the features of the face being very squared. So it looks very tough and it feels very aggressive, especially when you look at the contrast between how squared the face is versus how smooth the hair and the horns are. I would probably put the Vikings logo in A tier. This is a logo from 1966, so about 70 years ago, and the design itself is very timeless. They made some really nice improvements and they made a great logo even better. So looking at the Patriots logo, I'm a really big fan of the shape. It feels super iconic, really expressive, and it reminds me of brands like Nike and Apple, which have a very memorable, iconic design that clearly stands out from their competitors. Even if it is a bit weird and unusual, it feels energetic. It feels kind of like a flag waving, and I'm a big fan of the design. I especially like how they use this design in their branding. So it's a very easy logo to use, and the cutouts from the face are very simplified and they work well even at a very small scale. Top tier Patriots S tier logo. So up next with the Saints, I do think the design is very balanced. So visually it's just appealing to look at, but I also don't think it really has too much energy or character to it. When I compare it to the logos in C tier, I would say it's maybe a little bit more balanced in the design. I would probably put it either in C or B tier, maybe in between, but I would maybe put it in C tier. When you compare it to something like the Cowboys logo, I know the shape has significance, but they didn't really do anything with that symbol, as opposed to something like the Texans logo, where it takes the shape of the star and it turns it and transforms it into something memorable. Talking about the New York Giants logo, I think it's fairly straightforward, obviously the NY, but I do like the way they formatted this typography. So the N and the Y is very consistent, and I like the blocky theme that they used throughout the serifs and then also at this underline with the Y. It feels like there's some thought put into the character of these letters. It's very simplified, but I do like what they've done with it. I would either put it in B or A tier. Maybe we put it in B tier. So the New York Jets logo, I think, is a very plain logo, but I will say I do like that they have the silhouette of the football as a badge shape, which has some intention to it. I think the color is fine. It kind of reminds me of turf or like a football field, which I'm sure is intentional. The Jets logo, C tier, maybe B tier. So up next with the Eagles logo, I'm actually a very big fan of one of the decisions they made in particular, and that is to have the mascot facing the left side. Every single logo in the NFL points to the right. It's a detail that's probably not as important, but it definitely helps it stand out, especially because the use of birds for mascots is very common in the NFL. I think the illustration itself, the line work, is done very, very gracefully. And I'm a big fan of basically all of the shapes used in the logo. So I'm a big fan of the Eagles logo. I would probably put it in A tier. But looking at the Steelers logo, so each star is supposed to mean yellow for coal, orange for iron, blue for steel scrap, which is a cool concept. But I will say the logo itself is very plain, and even though conceptually it's cool, functionally I do not think it really works as well as the other logos. When you zoom out, the word Steelers is basically completely gone, and it almost feels like an afterthought putting the word here. It feels so small compared to the other elements, even though the name of the brand seems like it would be very important. If you're a Steelers fan, you probably appreciate this logo more than I do. I would probably put it in D tier. You would think with a logo relating to steel that this would feel very strong and monumental, but the logo just feels very neutral. Up next, the Seahawks logo. Immediately, I'm very drawn to the color palette. I think there's a lot of energy in this green. The logo itself maybe seems a bit flat, but it also looks like it's moving fast because it's tilted and it has these kind of speed lines in the back. I'm a big fan of the Seahawks logo for it being as abstract as it is. I don't know if it's my favorite mascot logo, but it's definitely up there. I think it's a nice blend between unique abstract design and translation of an animal, but for now I'll put it in A tier. I do think it's probably one of the most memorable logos in the NFL. So the Titans logo is very unique. So initially I'm looking at the flames and they feel very wavy. The curves I think are very appealing, very balanced, and I liked how they use color to block out certain areas of the flame to give it depth. I think the only issue I'm having is what's inside the center of this circle maybe feels a bit inconsistent with the design of the flames. So it's very sharp, geometric, angular, but I do know the logo has a lot of meaning to it, and I think as a badge or mark it actually works fairly well for branding. I would probably put it in B tier. Looking at the Buccaneers logo, I really enjoy the illustration. I think the line work is very well executed. I like that they use the sword shape as the flag to relate it to the inside of the design. There might be a little bit too much detail. I would probably put it in A or B tier, maybe leaning towards B tier. I think the main issue is that a lot of the detail gets lost when you zoom out compared to some of these other mascots because it's contained within the flag. So now that the Washington football team is officially rebranded to the Washington Commanders, here's what their new logo looks like. To be honest, I was a bit underwhelmed with the design. I thought their logo would share a stronger relationship to their new name being the Commanders. Let me know what you think of the new logo in the comments. I would probably keep it in C tier just because I'm still not sure what direction they're going to take the brand moving forward. The 49ers logo. I know there's a lot of diehard 49ers fans, but if we're looking at what we've reviewed so far, and when I compare the Chiefs logo to the 49ers logo, it is shockingly similar. I will say I think that the 49ers colors are more memorable. The Chiefs logo looks corny, and I don't really get that same impression from the 49ers logo. I'm leaning towards C tier though, and I'm sorry for my friends out in San Francisco. Thank you all for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.